This is just making sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What's the setup? How do you sit here? Okay. Thank you.
Are you the chair or one of the panelists?
Sorry?
Are you the chair or one of the panelists?
No, I'm just one of the discussants. I'm not the chair. Yeah, I'm not the chair. So yeah.
What's up?
Lani. Yeah.
We have just few minutes.
Yeah, that's all right. Do you know if anyone else is attending in person?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. Okay.
Is it our student man?
Or not?
You brought this.
Sorry?
You brought this?
Yeah.
I have one trying to.
That's the only straight wall coming through. I do need some. I need power. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir.
So we are
Hello, hello, hello. Can you all hear me?
Yes, yeah,
All right, thank you. I think we're waiting for our main guest.
So, Chair, sir, we have Dr. Lani Akonde here with us physically.
Okay, thank you.
So we're only waiting for Dr. Falakenu Mube. Then I think we have other discussions available.
Okay, so Dr. Ogungbe is not going to be here. She sent me a message yesterday saying that, but she does have a response, which I will read out.
So we can start now then.
Yeah. But is our main guest there, or is he online? And no, he's not online yet.
Or Noah himself. I don't think.
Oh, he's not here. We don't have him here, so he's probably going to join us, so we have to wait for him a bit.
All right. Okay, here he is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, Noah. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
All right.
No, because I'm connecting from non-private key myself. This is what I'm connecting from. This is an ECM, so I couldn't swap it.
All right. I think we're all here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Tony Ada. I teach at Minnesota State University, Moorhead, in the film program. And we are here because of a beautiful book by Noah Tsika. It's one of many really excellent works that he has written. So first of all, I want to say, before I get into my congratulations and message for Noah, I want to quickly introduce our group. I've introduced myself. I'm chairing the panel. And we also have with us Professor Lonnie Akonde, Professor Matthew Brown, Professor Tolu Lokwe Bikunle. But Professor Ogungbe is not going to be here with us. She has a conflicting appointment at this time, but she sent a response, which I will read out to you. And we also have Professor Elizabeth Olayiwola. So welcome, everyone. I would say because of the nature of these presentations, that we will all take about 15 minutes or less to give our response to the book. And then we will take questions and comments for now. I hope that works with everyone. Yes?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, so let me get to it real quick. So again, congratulations, Noah, on another awesome piece of scholarship. For those unfamiliar with his works, Noah is the author of several books, including Nollywood Stars, Media and Migration in West Africa and the Diaspora, Traumatic Imprint, Cinema, Military Psychiatry, and the Aftermath of War, Screening the Police, Film and Law Enforcement in the United States, and Cinematic Independence, Constructing the Big Screen in Nigeria. So the book we're looking at today is, as I said, another excellent piece to his collection already. So thank you for the opportunity to read and reflect on your compelling book, Noah. African Media in an Age of Extraction, Nollywood Geographies. The book is groundbreaking. It's a groundbreaking contribution to African media studies, political ecology, and global cultural analysis. It is a layered exploration of Nollywood's entanglement with extractive economies, environmental issues, and transnational capitalism. I enjoyed the rigor, originality, and especially the interdisciplinary dimensions of the book. I think that's highly commendable. The book's integration of political economy, environmental humanities, infrastructure studies, the central concept of Nollywood Geographies is a powerful analytical tool, and I like the way Noah presented it as working in terms of frames. It allows for spatial, material, and ecological reading of Nigerian or any other cinema for that matter. It moves beyond, what we are familiar with, traditional textual or tourist approaches to film analysis, because here we have a kind of highlighting of the infrastructural, environmental, and economic conditions that shape cinematic production and reception. Now, this framing around geographies is especially effective in revealing how Nollywood is not merely a cultural industry, but a node, a point within global circuits of capital, labor, and ecological transformations. The book's temporal depth, working, from colonial cinema's complicity in imperial extraction to contemporary Nollywood's corporate entanglements, was quite intriguing and appealing to me. The readings of early travelogues, mining process films, especially the analysis of Fincho, and Cold War propaganda cinema enriched the arguments and historical specificity that the book is sort of foregrounding. Simultaneously, the analysis of more contemporary works like G01, Dark October, Lost Cafe, all of these demonstrate a nuanced grasp of how past legacies persist in present media practices. And this ability to draw the historical continuities and entanglements really produces a fascinating piece of reading. Excuse me. I enjoyed the book's exploration of Nollywood's complex relationship with neoliberalism, especially in Noah's discussion of the transition from old to new Nollywood. That segment of the book could have easily taken the usual path of, mapping a teleological progression. And that would be quite tempting, but, the book opts to emphasize the coexistence, mutual dependence, and contradictions between these two phases of Nollywood. Additionally, the comparison with Hollywood's own financial opacity is quite persuasive because it helps to destabilize the simplistic binaries that we often make of global North versus global South informality. The book really excels at showing how the materiality of extraction, the mines, oil fields, reclaimed lands, floods, infrastructure, intersect with cinematic representations and production spaces. For instance, I really like the section on G01, which was able to bring in histories of environmental violence into the conversation. I want to move on to some thoughts I had or some questions that I had as I was reading along. The book emphasizes media infrastructure and capital flows, and it's quite insightful in that work. But I wondered if we could have heard more from the voices of audiences and the behind the scene labor, whether they're camera operators or food vendors or editors or sound engineers. For instance, what could the context of informal and gendered labor tell us about this kind of work that Tsika is doing? I felt that the book's claims could be strengthened by acknowledging the diversity of audience interpretations also. For example, in the section where I believe it's Dark October was discussed, I found myself asking the question, do viewers in Port Harcourt respond differently to a film like Dark October than, say, diaspora audiences whom Tsika exposed the film to? While the book's comparison with Hollywood are clear and necessary, I also wondered if engagement with other global South industries such as indigenous cinemas, Latin American cinemas, or even other Asian media economies, if those could have yielded richer comparative insights as alternatives or resistances to North-South okay, that's what is catching me now. Extractivist models. The book is deeply researched, perhaps over-researched, because the density of theoretical jargon sometimes overwhelms in the text. And this prompts the question, who is the target audience for this book? Also, do you think Africans, say Nigerian, Yoruba, Igbo, Ijaw, traditional philosophies on the environment, could those have added to the depth of your analysis? To close, the book makes a landmark contribution to African media studies, political ecology, and film theory. It challenges us to rethink cinema as a material and infrastructural phenomenon embedded in global circulation of capital, labor, and environmental change. I'll close on that point as my remarks, and I will take on the next person, and after all the presentations, we will have questions. Thank you.
Would that be me?
So, yes,
Correct.
the next responder will be Professor Lani Akonde.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to say hi to the rest of the panel. No, I think we're actually having, well, we'll call this a one-on-one for the first time ever. So it's nice meeting you, even if it's virtual. I'll quickly jump into my review. First of all, congratulations on this piece. I mean, it's so well researched. One can tell from the moment you jump in, and so I want to congratulate you on that. Focusing on Nollywood as first an industry, Tsika makes an argument to resituate Nollywood as part of and an extension of the same and continuing Western resource extraction and exploitation in Africa and Nigeria in particular. Noah's position, therefore, minimizes ideations of Nigeria's Nollywood as an exotic, indigenous, culturally purist cinema that has, with unusual brevity, carved its identity in isolation. If most other works have imagined the Nollywood industry as a challenge to the likes of Hollywood, as one whose informality stands as an alternative to Hollywood's formal structures, as a post-colonial cinema that rejects the overwhelming force of Hollywood's universalization, Tsika makes a strong argument that this is not altogether the case. That when we see Nigeria's film industry as just another industry in the line of many industries that have been created by the capitalist West to extract resources in Africa, then we see how Nollywood's hybridization has been ongoing and working in service of American interests. To say bluntly, Nollywood as an industry is uncannily like the exploitative extraction of oil in Nigeria and shipped abroad to enrich the capitalist West. In an interdisciplinary journey that takes him through African studies, film theory, media studies, some economics, etc., Noah brings together ideas of the Nollywood film industry, both as an allegory for and a reflection of Nigeria and Africa's environmental degradation. He acknowledges, for example, the cost of media production's reliance on natural and environmental resources in ways that are unique to Africa and its dependence relationship with the capital West. If Noah's position may hint of a number of isms, pessimism, defeatism, and I use these terms in a critical, not necessarily negative way, this work takes a bold step in calling our attention to another concept-defining way of reimagining the Nollywood industry. For one, it maintains the clarity as to its intent to challenge pro-African, Nigerian, culturally purist and absolutist approaches to Nollywood's identity. In so doing, Tsika advocates for moving away from what he considers a more simplistic, exuberant, and perhaps headstrong Nollywood industry character to a more complex, nuanced, and flexible one which accommodates notions of Nollywood as a neo-colonial, neoliberal, exploitative, capitalist, American-informed cinema. In the spirit of these complexities and nuances, ReadersTsika identifies that the extraction is not one-sided, but Nigeria has been both unconsciously and consciously complicit in its own self-exploitation. Again, as he would often return to, this is not unlike other historically exploitative industries in Nigeria, where Nigerians with means and access have historically been complicit in the nation's mass resource reappropriation. While we may not always agree on the degree to which the Nollywood industry is extricably hybridized with the Western capitalist Hollywood agenda, this book insists on a Nollywood reality that cannot be theorized away or ignored. While it complicates the identity of Nollywood industry, it also does the consequential job of opening newer ways to imagine the Nollywood industry and de-exoticize it. So that's my review for now. Then I'll get to the questions part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on quickly to the next discussant, and that is Professor Matthew Brown.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Greetings from Nairobi. I'm in Nairobi doing some research ahead of the African Literature Association conference, which kicks off next week. And I'm honored to be invited to speak about the great scholarship that NOAA has produced here and to participate in the Lagos Studies Association. Congratulations once again, NOAA, Tsika, on African media in an age of extraction, which is an important, impressive, thoroughly researched, extremely detailed, I know we're all kind of repeating ourselves here, account of the ways in which cinema that was created in and about Nigeria and some other parts of Africa depict, participate in, and sometimes critique the extraction of natural resources that fuel our modern global economy and hasten its seemingly inevitable collapse. Tsika uses the frame of Nollywood Geographies, the subtitle of the book, to describe the, quote, social and natural landscapes that the industry makes visible as local phenomena reflecting, initiating, opposing, or standing in ambivalent relationship to global trends. Those geographies include northern tin mines, eastern coal mines, reclaimed land, timber forests, and the oil fields of the Niger Delta, among others. Tsika shows that these sites frame our ability to understand cinema in Nigeria in different ways. They've attracted filmmakers for various reasons, from the imperatives of colonial propaganda and Hollywood acquisitiveness to post-colonial critique and celebration. They have animated plots for the obvious reason that they also animate human activity in a capitalist world. And they contribute to the production of cinema, often supplying the very material from which screen media are made and distributed, such as the petroleum that goes into celluloid, the gasoline/petrol used to transport filmmakers and their products around the world, and the oil revenues that fund certain kinds of production and broadcasting. One of the book's unique and significant contributions is that it conceptualizes Nollywood relationally, not only as a name for the film industry that preceded from the rise of video films in the early 90s, but as a signifier of the ways in which Nigeria and Nigerians have participated in the production of screen media in and about Nigeria, including colonial cinema and, importantly, Hollywood films. This latter move could be said to be a hallmark of Tsika's scholarship, particularly his most recent 2 volumes about Nigeria. He's certainly doing work that few others are doing by analyzing the ways in which Hollywood has long set its sights on Nigeria, not only in the wake of the Netflixification of Nollywood, but from the very beginning of the 20th century, when Hollywood identified Nigeria as a place to both produce and exhibit screen media. If you're not convinced that the story of Nigerian screen media includes Hollywood, this book should leave no doubt. It's simply stunning how much and how often American and sometimes Euro-American filmmakers found it necessary to come and tell stories about Nigeria. Indeed, at the end of the book, Tsika gestures toward a field of cinema studies that would more closely consider the phenomenon of second units, those production teams within a production team that produce and direct content that is integral to a film, but can only be created in places to which the primary producers, directors, cinematographers, and other personnel who contribute to films are not willing or unable to travel. Hollywood films made in this way simply have a lot to say about and significant perspectives on Nigeria and its natural resources. Tsika brings Hollywood films created by this mode of production into useful conversation with Nigerian films that have also a lot to say about and important perspectives on Nigeria and its natural resources. The analysis is exceptionally detailed and, as I said before, and thoroughly researched, delving into what could be considered the minutiae of how productions were funded and created, how and why various individuals came to participate in them, and how the various extractive industries he considers operate. In the conclusion, Tsika refers to his own writing as obsessive, which a reader could certainly glean from the prolific detail and analysis in his scholarship. But of course, that doesn't necessarily justify a critique in and of itself. For any scholar interested in the history of screen media production in Nigeria and/or eco-critical studies related to Nigeria, this book will be foundational, a resource that simply cannot be ignored. And that leads me to another important feature of the book, and that's its pioneering effort in Nigerian eco-criticism. It's inevitable that Nollywood studies and eco-criticism would come together at some point, but it nevertheless takes an intrepid scholar to do that work as thoroughly and as evocatively as Tsika has done. While certainly not the first to consider these issues in tandem, Tsika has nevertheless pushed the field very far forward, with such sustained analysis stretching over 300 pages. The fields of Nollywood studies, eco-criticism, and Hollywood studies are all indebted to his self-proclaimed obsessiveness. Having established the high regard with which this scholarship should be held, in what follows I have formulated just a few minor questions and provocations for the author, given that we are fortunate to have him here today. I hope it's okay that I'll include mine in my presentation here now. These questions each flow from the very ways in which the book should be praised, its unique Hollywood-Nollywood relationality, its attention to detail, and its contributions to eco-critical studies. Tsika is an important figure in Nollywood studies because he brings to the field a solid grounding in American film and media studies that few of us share. For various historical and structural reasons, the vast majority of scholars who write about Nollywood are either African or trained as Africanists. We tend to think of our work as contributing ultimately to understanding Africa, its internal workings, and its place in the world. And Tsika does this too, but he also places Nollywood in relation to global media ecologies. We should all be thankful for that work, and as a special issue of the Journal of Black Camera that he edited some years ago attempted to establish, more of us should be doing more of that work. But it remains difficult, I would suggest, to be truly expert in both. Noah has done a very, very commendable job. Scholars like Brian Larkin, who has expertise in Nollywood and Bollywood and media studies more generally, also does this well. And let us not forget that Jonathan Haynes mastered early modern European studies before he mastered African studies. But academic fields tend to be so inwardly focused and self-referential that they develop esoteric ways of speaking and understanding themselves, which it takes an entire career to master fully. And we then tend to become gatekeepers of that esotericism. So while no reviewer or editor of African media in an age of extraction might have noticed, and I'm now going to get to a little detail, I cannot imagine any participant in the upcoming African Literature Association conference starting here next week in Nairobi referring to Okonkwo as a, quote, born leader or as charismatic, which Tsika does on page 133. And just to be clear, Tsika reframes this characterization of Okonkwo as Achebes, not the NTAs. This might seem a preposterously fine point, but then again, that's the greater point I'm trying to make. Okonkwo looms so large in African literary criticism, the subject of thousands of studies by now, and serves as a foundational paradigm for our field, that we've established a very firm picture of the character, one whose trajectory is defined precisely by his lack of charisma and leadership. But can we imagine undermining the scholarship of someone as intelligent, well-trained, rigorous, and invested as Tsika with such petty grievances? Often scholars do that, but we should restrain ourselves. There may be a few other similarly infelicitous moments in the book, but they're not at all important. My question for the author and for all of us today is simply to ask, what else can be said about the challenge of mastering the languages of both American media studies and Africanist media studies? On the subject of detail and obsessiveness, I would like to say that while I find the research impressive, and while all subsequent scholars of Nollywood and extraction must not neglect this book, I found myself longing for more meta-analysis. There's so much data, as Tony said, in the book, with plenty of sustained readings and references to important theoretical frames. But having established all of that, is there more to be said about some of the patterns and trends in that data? Let me consider one example. Tsika shows that Hollywood productions, as well as process films, or films that document and propagandize the industrial processes of modern extraction, tend to depict Africans as unproductive stewards of their own lands, as unable or unaware of how to create sustainable wealth from their natural resources. Meanwhile, he shows that Nollywood tends to critique not regular African people and not always multinational corporations, and therefore not extraction more fundamentally, but instead Nollywood reserves its critique for the government's inability to create forms of sustainable wealth from natural resources. Might this suggest some kind of ideological orientation common to both industries? What terminology would describe that orientation? Is it portable to other contexts? To me, this pattern requires more theorizing and perhaps the development of a particular language to describe the central ideological processes that could produce it. That said, our world and its various phenomena and the actions of humans are so complex and varied that perhaps no one theory or set of theories could do it justice. Nevertheless, in the world of literary studies, in which I'm grounded, we tend to reduce the number of cases and examples we cite and closely read specific examples precisely to impose a useful kind of order on all that complexity, in the hopes that such order, contrived as it might seem, will help others see similar patterns in other data. To my mind, there's still work to be done in theorizing from the many, many examples that Tsika explores in his book. Permit me to add one other very small point here. For all of the detail in the book, I'm wondering why Tsika doesn't write more about Kelani Shawaroide, either in relationship to timber or petroleum, since it's a film where timber extraction allegorizes petroleum extraction. Is it that because the film is already so widely written about? Again, in literary studies, that would be a good reason to engage it, not to ignore it. And when it comes to petroleum, I would just like to suggest that we all take a look at the pioneering animated film Lady Bucket and the Motley Mobsters, directed by Adebisi Adedayo, which came out in 2020. I don't have time to dwell on it now, but as I've said elsewhere, to my mind, it's a criminally ideological vanity project created by an oil-adjacent geologist to celebrate Nigeria's resource curse. It could have been productively considered in this book. Finally, to return to the question of Africanist specialization, but also to think more deeply about eco-critical studies, I would like to ask Noah if there's time to say more about the idea of the age of extraction. He pauses in chapter 4 to argue the point that ecological devastation did not begin with colonialism, writing that, quote, even pre-colonial forms of export agriculture wreaked ecological havoc, unquote. The term pre-colonial could be at issue here, if by pre-colonial Tsika means before 1885, but perhaps after 1500, then isn't it capitalist modernity itself that's driving that decision? As coastal cities emerged, as slave raiding and slave wars proliferated, as the Atlantic economic system solidified, it certainly seems likely that African economies would clear land and harvest resources in destructive ways to feed those new processes. Think of the ivory transported to the East African coast through cleared forest caravan paths to satiate the hunger of Omani traders. But if Tsika really means pre-modern, can he clarify how clearing a few acres of forest to plant a cassava farm is related to the kind of environmental destruction the book critiques? Perhaps this particular Africanist has something to learn. But has extraction always been endemic to the African continent or to human economies everywhere? Or is there a time when human uses of the land morphed into what we would call extraction today? Indeed, what is the quote-unquote age of extraction? These minor questions and provocations aside, I applaud Noah and highly recommend African Media in an Age of Extraction. Thank you for your attention, everyone.
All right, thank you, Professor Brown. Just on time. Okay. All right, so we'll move. Thank you very much for that. We'll move quickly to Professor Tolulokpe Ibikunle. I believe she's here. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank
Good
you.
afternoon, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be part of this panel, and I'm going to go straight to the point. A lot has been said already, so I'll try not to repeat what has been said, but I'll just be as brief as possible. The book is not just about film. It examines Nollywood as the product of extractive system, and it explores film's role in capitalism, infrastructure, and climate crisis. So it is about cables, mines, contracts. It examines how Nollywood is built on infrastructures originally created to extract from Nigeria oil, tin, or silver. So Tsika's argument is that Nollywood is shaped by systems of extraction, literal and metaphorical. And the media is not only narrative, that is what it's saying, and that it is ecological and industrial. The informality is entangled with global capital and climate constraints, and that we can't study cinema as only an art form. It is also a terrain of extraction. The Nollywood films are made in mind landscape, edited on machines created with African resources and distributed by a power structure beyond Africa. So the book is structured in a way that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed it because each chapter focuses on different geography or logic of extractions. Our film becomes a cartography of global power. So Tsika methodology is as special as it is textural. And the book is so unique, and I find it very, very useful for me, especially presently that I'm working on something very, very, very much like it. I'm having a research that's this book stands like a literary backup for me. So what set this book apart is how it integrates media studies with environmental humanities. So how it reframes media infrastructure as ecological and extractive, how it pushes African cinema studies into a new terrain entirely, and how it forces us to see the environmental costs, the infrastructural challenges, and the way cinema participates in planetary crisis. So I love the fact that Ijogbo is being used, Ayinla, which reflects on stardom, global capital, and contracts. And Dark October also. The films they are not just about drama or history. They are evidence of how Nigerian geography of extraction becomes. And Tsika shows how Hollywood distributes in Nigerian via intermediaries, and how Netflix tech platform reshaped Nollywood's flow, and how US capital, IMAX, and licensing spec dictates what gets shown, and how even what we often call local Nigerian cinema. This affirms that cinema is not just story, but infrastructure. That Nollywood is a branch in global extractive system, and this book helps shift paradigm of African cinema study from identity and aesthetics to materiality and capital. So, materiality, capital, and sustainability. So, my question to us all is that how can we apply this framework to other African and diaspora cinemas? And how might film education respond to this infrastructural critique? And so my submission is that this book is not just only about Nollywood, it is about us as scholars, educators, and creators. We all are implicated in the infrastructures and ecologies of screen media. It is on this note that I adopted this book as a strong literature review for my research on screen diplomacy in an age of extraction, where I examine Japan-African cinematic exchange in Nollywood. And my only question is this: your book powerfully linked Nollywood to global system of extraction. But if African media is so deeply entangled in these extractive structures, economic infrastructures, and ideological, is it true independence or resistance even possible? Is true independence or resistance even possible for Nollywood? And what might that look like? That is the only question that I have for the author. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, moving on. So our next presenter would have been Folakemi Ogungbe, and as I said earlier, she's unable to be here because of conflict in her schedule. So she did send me a response yesterday, which I will proceed to read. Okay, so here it goes. I want to congratulate Noah Tsika for adding this book to his long list of publications. It is quite refreshing to see the way he linked Hollywood to global circuits of cultural phenomenon, which is quite different from the former treatments of Nollywood as an isolated cultural phenomenon. I like the analysis of how mining, oil drilling, and land reclamation can shape both the physical sites of film production and the thematic preoccupations of contemporary Nollywood. This provides us with new lens with which to view Nollywood and indeed African media. Another fascinating point in this book is the tracing of parallels between Hollywood's vertical integrated studio system and the business practices of Nollywood firms like Film House. Through this, Tsika shows how economic power and environmental impact are deeply entangled in the industry's evolution. I, however, know that this phenomenon is not new, as it is in the nature of economics for parties to want to control the entire value chain. By tracing these parallels, though, the position of Nollywood as a global entity with its fast adaptability to market forces is firmly situated. This perspective also is usefully complemented by Moradeu Adejumobi in her study of neoliberal rationalities in New Nollywood, as it highlights the tensions filmmakers face amid shifting financing models and marketing dependencies. Methodologically, Tsika succeeds in weaving together political economy, environmental history, and film studies into a compelling manuscript. I particularly like his use of case studies where he used on-location shoots in dredge landscapes to analysis of celluloid's material cost. This shows an understanding cinema as both a cultural and a material practice. This grounding in political ecology also echoes Michael Watt's concept of oil frontiers, which examines how extractive zones like the Niger Delta and the Gulf of Mexico produce overlapping social and ecological dynamics. However, the study's focus on Hollywood-Nollywood comparisons could sideline other transnational influences and emergent dynamics. Nevertheless, Tsika's volume remains a vital contribution, opening new pathways for scholars to explore the intertwined geographies of cinema, capital, and the environment. Thank you. All right, so that's Professor Gungbe's contribution response to the book. We will now move to Professor Olayiwola, who I believe is here with us.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Good afternoon.
I want to increase my volume. Okay. I extend my heartfelt congratulations to the author for once again expanding the field of Nollywood studies with this important book. In African Media in an Age of Extraction, Noah Tsika delivers a provocative and deeply layered interrogation of Nollywood, refracted through the lenses of global resource capitalism. In this ambitious book, Tsika challenges readers to rethink Nollywood space and political engagements and extractive industries, be they cinematic, material, or environmental. The work stands as a significant intervention in African media studies, offering an original analytical vocabulary for examining how African screen cultures are both shaped by and complicit in logics of extractions. At its core, African media is in an age of extraction proposes that Nollywood cannot be disentangled from the infrastructures and ideologies of resource capitalism. These moves Tsika contends is not metaphorical. Rather, he insists that there is a material and historical correspondence between screen media and the extractive industry that precede, formed, or operate in parallel to them. From colonial cinema's visual fascination with resource enclaves to the neoliberal architects of New Nollywood, Tsika argues that extraction is a foundational, persistent grammar of African media. The book is organized into a series of richly textured chapters, each exploring Nollywood's relation to extractive geographies, corporate logics, and imperial legacies. Tsika begins by grounding the project in colonial cinema, drawing attention to the way early films in Nigeria advanced European resource interest and racial ideologies, while simultaneously laying the groundwork for contemporary media infrastructures. He critiqued established reading of colonial films, particularly those focused solely on ideology of racism, as too narrow, arguing instead for a more expansive view that includes how film operated as a tool of extraction itself, cataloging methods of mining, farming, and transportation. This foundational framing allows seekers to make a compelling case that the material reality of film making, such as the sourcing of tin or petroleum, must be recognized as part of media's ecological footprint. He draws on Cacheton's African Eco Media and Jennifer Peterson's work on the state's ideologies of nature to underscore the environmental and infrastructural dimension of Nollywood and how this intersects with colonial and post-colonial logics. The book is especially insightful when exploring the evolution of Nollywood itself from the low-budget direct-to-video model of old Nollywood to the transnational multiplex-oriented strategies of new Nollywood. Tsika refuses to romanticize either era. Instead, he examines how new Nollywood's capital-intensive approach are complete with vertical integration and product placement, replicates the corporate formation of Hollywood studio system while deepening class and access inequality within Nigeria. Tsika's methodological contribution is notable, drawing inspiration from Robert Stan, Mambebe, and Apadura. He adopts a planetary approach that considers multiple levels of analysis, local, national, continental, and global. This allows him to situate Lagos next to Los Angeles and Port Harcourt alongside Provo Pass, not merely for comparison, but underscore the constructive relationship between global North and global South media. One of the most engaging aspects of the book is his treatment of Nollywood as a resource cinema, a cinema shaped by and shaping public perception of development, scarcity, and opportunity. Tsika is particularly attentive to how Nollywood articulates a paradox of visibility. It makes visible the infrastructure of wealth and extraction, while often leaving their political and environmental costs obscured or depoliticized. He argues for examples that Nollywood frequently portrayal of urban infrastructure, luxurious spaces, or religious spectacles inadvertently legitimizes certain neoliberal fantasies of upward mobility while colliding the labor, land displacement, or ecological degradation that undergird them. That said, the book is not without its challenges. Tsika's writing, while theoretically rich, often assumes familiarity with a wide array of thinkers, themes, and policy histories. This density, though intellectually rewarding, can render part of the book less accessible to readers new to Nollywood or African media studies. Furthermore, while centers on Southern English language and predominantly Christian productions. This exclusion of Hausa language, Kannywood, or Francophone African media is felt, especially in a book that champions a planetary perspective. While Tsika's extraction framework is bold and original, one might argue that not all Nollywood productions are easily legible through this lens. His reading risks totalizing the extractive metaphor and overdetermining cultural productions through political economy. I ask, are there Nollywood films that resist or exist outside extractive logic? Nonetheless, Tsika's intervention are sharp and necessary. He refused to let Nollywood off the hook as a cultural nationalist project or a tool of soft power. Instead, he asked difficult questions. What do the geographies of film production reveal about the political economy of Nigeria? How do seemingly local films participate in global flow of capital, pollution, and cultural labor? What forms of resistance or complicity emerge when cinema and resources extraction converge? Importantly, Tsika is not content to view Nollywood merely as a passive reflection of extractive capitalism. Rather, he sees it as an active participant in shaping special imaginaries that are central to how communities envision development, ownership, whether in its depiction of missionary encounter, urban wealth, or enchanted rural landscape. Nollywood's contribution to, and sometimes contest the narrative of modernization and consumption that sustains new liberal capitalism. In sum, African media in an age of extraction is an important, original, and field-shifting book. Tsika's work extends the boundaries of Nollywood scholarship by embedding it within a global analysis of resource capitalization and environmental politics. His insistence on thinking across infrastructure, cultural, economic, and ecological opens up new direction for scholars of African media, environmental humanities, and post-colonial studies. Thank you very much. And once again, congratulations to the author.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for the responses. I'm very sure that Tsika is excited to hear all the presentations and probably trying to put together his response right now. So when you're ready, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good, great. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. It's really humbling to hear from all of you. I really appreciate your engagement with this work. Thank you for your provocations, for your questions, for your criticisms. I've taken copious notes here. I've tried to write everything down. I know there's going to be a recording available as well, so that's great. Where to begin? I really appreciate Professor Ada's comments about the Hollywood-Nollywood connection that I emphasize not being the only relevant frame. It's just one way of framing Nollywood's worldliness, right? So I really tried not to suggest otherwise in this book. I don't think I did enough to indicate in my previous book, Cinematic Independence, that the Hollywood-Nollywood connection is but one connection. So in this book, I tried harder to suggests that there are other ways of framing Nollywood comparatively. And so I'm really excited to hear from Tolulope about her work, about her research, about the fact that she's bringing Japan into conversation with Nigeria, right? That's the kind of work that I would love to see. I'm really looking forward to her research. So I find that really exciting. We do need to know more about Nollywood's relationship, its growing relationship to Asian economies, to Asian cultural contexts. So the Japan-Nigeria connection is, I think, really important. The China-Nigerian connection, of course, is incredibly important, increasingly so. I appreciate Professor Ada's mentioning that Nollywood is not merely a cultural industry, but a node in these global systems. I agree that there could and should be more on audiences, more on audience reception in this book. That's the kind of work that I haven't been doing enough of. I'm really glad to see that Anulika Aguina, for instance, has been doing audience research brilliantly, I would add. But I do think that the voices of audiences would have helped, particularly viewers in Port Harcourt, right? I am interested in knowing how viewers in Port Harcourt have responded to films like Dark October that directly represent their experiences or that attempt to directly represent their experiences. I don't have that information. I haven't conducted research on audiences in Port Harcourt, unfortunately. And there does need to be more on behind the scenes labor in this book. I only gestured toward it with my consideration of second unit work. But there should be more of that, absolutely. As I mentioned in the book, when I showed Dark October to my students, many of whom were Nigerian American, they asked, who is this film for? I mean, who is able to really understand what this film is saying? Do you have to be from Port Harcourt? Do you have to be from the Niger Delta region to comprehend that this film is a scathing account of local corruption, that it's also an attempt to suggest the ongoing plundering of these communities? So again, I'm genuinely curious about how audience responses change across geographical contexts, right? Our audiences in the multiplexes in Lagos responding differently to Dark October from audiences elsewhere in the country? Are people in Port Harcourt even able to access Dark October? That's a key question, right? This is a film that after playing in the multiplexes, after premiering in Filmhouse locations, went straight to Netflix via the bundling of Nollywood content by Film One. And so, it's obvious that Netflix's penetration in the Niger Delta region is not extreme, right? Not many people in the Niger Delta region necessarily have Netflix subscriptions or are sharing passwords. So that is an important area of inquiry, but it's also a lacuna in the book. So yeah, engagement with other global South industries is welcome. Absolutely. I don't do that kind of work. Although I do think that looking at Nigerian extraction sites helps us to make certain environmental as well as political economic connections between Nigeria and other parts of the African continent. So I try to do a little bit of that. For instance, in the analysis of the Nun story, which was shot on location in Central Africa, partly on the basis of this calling card film that Sam Zeba had made in the forests of Yorubaland in Nigeria. So that's also a recurring theme in this book. That's something that I've seen again and again and again. Films about Nigerian extraction, about the extraction of Nigerian natural resources, have functioned as calling cards for filmmakers with wider ambitions. So that's what happened in the case of Fincho. I've been writing about Fincho for almost 20 years now. I'm fairly obsessed with Fincho. It's such a strange film. The capitalist work that's pro-extraction, that seeks to apologize for itself while also including an introduction from Harry Belafonte. I had hoped to interview Belafonte before he died, but I was never able to, because I don't know if he subsequently regretted appearing in this neo-colonialist film, right? This is a film that in so many ways runs counter to what he represented personally and politically, right? And yet there he is in the opening. I don't know if he knew what he was getting into. I don't know if the project had been misrepresented to him, but it is incredible to see the prologue in which he appears and talks about the need to look at Nigerian extraction sites and to specifically consider the timber industry, the Euro-American timber industry in Nigeria. So a fascinating film that has afterlives, as I argue in the book, right? Its themes and techniques and even personnel have returned to African extraction sites. Which leads me to Matt. I mean, Professor Brown, I have so wished for so long that I had come up with the term the long Nollywood century. That's, for those who don't know or don't remember, that's the title of Professor Brown's 2014 PhD dissertation, The Long Nollywood Century. So, Matt rather famously looks at the prehistories of Nollywood, including colonial films. So his timeline stretches back at least to the 1920s. And that's the kind of work that I want to do. I think it's really important to take that longue durée approach to Nollywood studies and to use the term Nollywood, as Matt points out, as a signifier, to use it metaphorically and not just literally, not just to describe post-1992, post-living in bondage, or even post-New York Times coinage media making in Nigeria, but to consider its prehistories. And so my argument, if you can boil it down, is that the long Nollywood century, to use Matt's brilliant terminology, courses through extraction sites. The long Nollywood century takes us necessarily from one site of extraction to another, starting with the tin fields of the Jos Plateau area in the 1920s and running through the coal mines, the coal hills of Enugu in the 1950s, through to the post 1956 post oil's discovery in commercial quantities in Olabiri, histories of petroleum to the present. I am so sorry about the misreading of Things Fall Apart. That's a really important point. I really appreciate that correction. That's just a careless error. And I am really insecure about bringing literature into my analyses because I am, as is now clear, I am not a skilled reader of literature. And I did not ask any literature experts to vet that section of the book. I should have done that. I have read Things Fall Apart. I've read some scholarship on Things Fall Apart. I still don't have any business writing about the novel Things Fall Apart here because those kinds of errors will crop up. And so I do misidentify Okonkwo. And so that's a problem, and I regret that, but that is a careless error. I wish I had known about Lady Bucket. I haven't seen that film. I don't know about it. For some reason, it wasn't on my radar. I have never encountered it, so I'm going to have to add that to my list, to my ever-growing list of films to see. Kalani's work, I think, could be much better represented in this book. I didn't write about as many of his films as I had wanted to, partly because I don't have access to high quality versions of them. I have concerns about the low quality, the low audiovisual quality of the versions of some of his films, some of his older films that I have, and so I wasn't sure I could incorporate them adequately. What else? Let's see. Yeah, Toto Lope asks a really important question about independence and resistance, about the feasibility of independence, about whether true independence, if we can call it that or should call it by that word, is even possible. Is true resistance even possible in the context of capitalist modernity or of late capitalism or of this ongoing age of extraction? This intensifying age of extraction. And so that's also something that interests me about films like F Alliance or Jogbon, which return to extraction sites that were depicted 100 years ago, or even just 75 years ago. And that's something I really appreciate about a film that I don't love, Up North. I think the film Up North is fascinating simply because it was shot on location in some of these extraction sites that were filmed as such 100 years ago. So in that film, we see a kind of return to the tin fields of northern Nigeria. And we see, perhaps inadvertently, I don't know if the filmmakers intended to show the persistence of extraction in northern Nigeria, but there are aerial shots, there are drone shots of extraction sites in up north, which I think is otherwise negligible in some ways. I mean, it's a film that has been roundly criticized by Nigerian critics. Brilliant Nigerian critics have taken it to task for being this touristic account of a fish out of water, of a big man from Lagos who relocates to northern Nigeria and is out of his depth and makes so many rookie mistakes. And those are the kinds of mistakes that I have long been worried about making. And so I really don't consider Hausa language films. That's one of my major blind spots. I don't do research on Kannywood, on northern Nigerian media. I just don't. I've been leaving that to others for a long time, and I don't yet feel that I'm equipped to really seriously consider Hausa language media. But that is definitely a blind spot. That is definitely a gap in my work, in my research. And so again, in this book, I tried to make clear that in industrial terms, I'm limiting my analysis to southern Nigeria, to southern Nigerian production sites. Although, there are films, as I mentioned, like Up North, that were shot up north, but that really come from Lagos, that come from Lekki. Yeah, there's a lot more to say about all of this, but I really appreciate all of the comments and questions and criticisms. I'm really grateful to all of you.
Sorry, I
Thank
still got
you.
my questions. I held
Oh,
up.
that's right. Yes. Hi, it's so
Okay.
good to see you. So good, finally.
I mean, at this point, the first one is kind of part question, part suggestion, and then the second is a question. So the first is, while the book emphasizes its focus on the industry, that also calls attention to the absence of its art form. as an avenue for understanding the extent to which Nollywood is inextricably tied to trans-capitalist Hollywood in America. So, I mean, that's the focus of your book, and you do a phenomenal job looking at Nollywood as an industry. But because of the strength of that part, it kind of leaves the other side of it blank. And so I wish that you'd kind of refer to it, even if slightly, go, this is what I'm doing here, but you know what? You need to do another kind of study for the art form side. So there's that. Then the second one is compelled hybridization with Hollywood and Western capitalism is not unique to the industry of Nollywood. There is hardly any film industry that is not foundationally influenced directly or indirectly by Hollywood. Could this position you take threaten a cinema's identity with some degree of predeterminism? How do we take your position into account as an invaluable frame for the Nollywood industry without falling into approaches that take Hollywood's presence as a constant, thereby calling attention more to Hollywood than the national cinema understudy? Would you like me to elaborate a bit on that, or?
I'm sorry, there was a glitch at the very end there. I wasn't able to hear the last question. I apologize.
Oh, no. We've been having some issues. It's about all week. So I'll go over the entire question again. How's that? Yeah. Compelled hybridization with Hollywood and Western capitalism is not unique to the industry of Nollywood. There's hardly any film industry that is not foundationally influenced directly or indirectly by Hollywood. Could your position threaten cinema identities with some degree of predeterminism? How do we take your position into account as an invaluable frame for the Nollywood industry without falling into approaches that take Hollywood's presence as a constant, thereby calling attention more to Hollywood than the national cinema understudy? And I would just like to say that to further frame this, your book is very timely. I really appreciate that you are compelling us to look at Nollywood, not necessarily, or as a matter of fact, to stay away from that purist approach that it's an indigenous cinema that needs to be looked at just like that, as it is, but to kind of imagine it as part of an art piece, okay, that extends outward. But at the same time, if Hollywood is always a factor, what does that mean for how we look at cinemas like Nigerian cinemas and say other African cinemas? If Hollywood will always be a constant, does it take away from their identity?
Those are great questions, really important questions. And again, it's so great to finally meet you, if only virtually. I've been following your work for so long. I've been hearing about you for so many years. So this is fantastic. I really appreciate this. Those are great questions. I agree that in taking an industry studies approach or a critical political economy approach, one does run the risk of perhaps undervaluing or ignoring or deflecting the art form itself, right? The creative aspects of these creative economies. So I am concerned about that, and I do think that that's a potential problem. I do think that I could do more in this book and more in my research more broadly to account for particular, specifically artistic practices, specifically creative practices, which would, of course, incorporate the possibility of resistance, right? Creative resistance, artistic resistance, ideological resistance to these impositions that you identify. And the Hollywood-Nollywood framework is also risky, right? It's risky for the reasons that you mentioned. It's risky because Hollywood is already, of course, overrepresented. It's overrepresented cinematically, it's overrepresented economically, it's overrepresented industrially, technologically, also academically, right? And so I am concerned about that. At the same time, I hope that others will take this kind of approach in looking at how Nollywood is intimately involved with media industries from all around the world. And that might not mean that all of those industries are bound up with Hollywood. I do think that there are ways of productively considering how certain media industries in the world are able to sidestep Hollywood's influence. And that includes Nollywood. There are ways for Nollywood filmmakers to evade or avoid or refuse Hollywood's influence. Filmmakers are doing that. There are filmmakers who aren't doing that, and that's not necessarily wrong or bad. There are pros and cons, right? As anyone who has worked with Netflix can attest, right? As any filmmaker in Nigeria, as any Nollywood filmmaker can attest, there are positive and negatives, right? It isn't simply exploitation. It isn't simply a story of exploitation or of imposition. There are ways of pushing back that Afolayan, of course, exemplifies, right? He hasn't minced words, especially lately in considering how Netflix has waxed and waned in its attentions to Nigeria, right? At first, Netflix came in hot and heavy. Netflix was in love and lust with all things Nollywood and thinking that its engagement with Nollywood would boost global subscriptions. And then a few years later, it started to pull back, right? It started to get nervous and started to say, well, this isn't really working out. We're not increasing subscribers in Nigeria, right? Nigeria still apparently, as far as we can tell, accounts for a small percentage of Netflix subscribers on the continent south of the Sahara. Right now, South Africa apparently accounts for roughly 75% of all Netflix subscriptions on the continent south of the Sahara. And so Netflix is pulling back, and Afolayan is saying, look, this is why we cannot rely on Hollywood. This is why we cannot invest in those opportunities and act as if they are going to save us. That's just not going to happen because Hollywood is erratic. Hollywood is fickle. Hollywood will come and go as Hollywood pleases without consulting with us, right? Without considering our audiences, without considering our promises, our questions. Yes.
All right.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you.
Thank you.
There is someone online who has a question, but could you put your question in the chat or in the Q&A?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
That would be awesome. But while we're waiting for that, I had a question about your selection, your film selections. Can you speak to us about how you selected your films? Were there films, for instance, you considered but then left, dropped in your process?
Yeah, absolutely. The selection process was, I don't want to say arbitrary, but it was exploratory. It was tentative. I had hoped to include more of Kalani's work, as I mentioned earlier, but as I've written elsewhere, issues of access are still they're big issues, right? So many of the important films of the early 1990s never got digitized, right? They never made the jump from VHS to VCD and DVD and streaming. I have so many old VHS cassettes that now no longer work, or that just show snow, right? I've overused them. I mean,
Same here.
Right. And so there are so many Nollywood films, old Nollywood films, classic Nollywood films from the early 90s and mid 90s and even late 90s that I wanted to write about, but that I wasn't able to write about, or that I didn't feel comfortable writing about because I didn't want to write from memory. And I wanted to be able to revisit these films, to watch them really carefully, really closely, but my VHS cassettes are in such poor condition. And the VCR in my office, the TV VCR combo in my office is also just malfunctioning. I'll put the VHS cassette in and then it says it needs to be cleaned, and then I'll get in and clean the heads and it still won't work. And so, yeah, these basic problems of access that we all deal with, right?
Yeah. So if Olusegun Shoitan is there, if he's there physically, can you move close to a mic or something and ask your question?
He's not here physically, he's online, so we asked him to drop a question in Q&A. Hopefully he's able to do that.
All right, okay. All right, are there other questions from the discussants while we're waiting?
I just put my email address in the chat as well.
All right, yes, got it, thank you. Okay, so while we're waiting, I do have another question. How would you, I'm assuming because you teach with some Nollywood films, you probably want to use some aspects of this book. So I'm interested in how you would integrate your framework of Nollywood geographies into your classroom.
I would like to do that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, every year I teach a course on Nollywood, and the last time I taught the course right before the book came out, I showed Doc October for the third time. And each time I showed Doc October, my students were confused. They said, well, what is going on here, right? What is the big deal? What is so dramatic about this situation? And so I think it would be really useful in the future to preface that screening with a lecture on these histories of extraction, with specifically an account of the post-1956 history of the Niger Delta region. Because, as I mentioned in the book, Dark October assumes audience knowledge of these depredations, right? I don't know if anyone has seen Dark October, but it's a relatively brief film. I mean, it doesn't have a long running time. It's 80 or 90 minutes, and so it doesn't. I think deliberately it doesn't set the scene for those who have no knowledge of the Niger Delta region, for those who aren't aware of Shell's plundering of the region, who aren't aware of the dispossession of entire Delta communities. It just dives in. And that's partly because it depicts characters who are themselves naive, who don't, because they're young, they're college kids, they're university students. And so they aren't prepared for the pain of the communities into which they wander at one point in the film. And so, yeah, I do think my students would benefit from more information, right? Not necessarily from my book, but from other scholars about these histories of extraction that I think inform so many new Nollywood films, so many recent releases.
Okay, thank you. So we have the question in the chat now. And if you can't see it, I can read it. Do you think Nollywood filmmakers consider their films from an extractive industry, which is part of a broader political economy perspective? Yeah.
That's a great question. I was actually just presenting at a conference in Oxford, and I was asked the same question. I think it's a brilliant question, a really important question. And I was also asked about Afolayan's Ijogbon, because I don't know how he feels about this. I don't know how Afolayan himself feels about the fact that he includes aerial shots of illegal mining activities in Oyo State. Some of those artisanal miners in Oyo State are visible. And there could be repercussions, right? The Nigerian state, as you know, has been cracking down or has been trying to crack down on illegal or artisanal mining. So these mines that were once, quote unquote, legitimately excavated, right, that were industrially run, that were operated by transnational corporations that since went out of business or that since um, stopped extracting tin from Nigeria and started extracting it from other parts of the world. Those mining sites have been reopened. They have been re-excavated by small scale activities, by those working for necessary reasons outside of the illicit economy, outside of the legal framework. Right there, they're trying to make money in whatever way they can. And Ijogbon opens with footage of their illegal activities. It opens with drone photography, remarkable aerial shots of artisanal mining in Oyo State. And so I am personally curious about that. I haven't wanted to press him. I haven't wanted to seem accusatory. I haven't wanted to seem like I'm accusing him. He's, as I'm sure most of you know, an incredibly thoughtful person who makes films with great care. And so I'm curious about that. I do have concerns about the individuals who are depicted in this film that's now streaming on Netflix. Right.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any other questions?
If there aren't others, I have one, but I'll pause. If there are others, it's not.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Matthew.
I'm actually just very curious, Noah, if you could say something about University of Amsterdam Press. Good, bad, or whatever, are they interested in Nollywood scholarship? Is this a place, we should be thinking about and so on? Is there anything to say?
That's a great question. I had a good experience with Amsterdam. The editor of the Film and Media Studies list is really interested in African studies. She's of African descent. She is really committed to this kind of work. But I just got an email from Amsterdam saying that they have sold their entire academic catalog to Taylor and Francis. So it looks like Amsterdam University Press might be folding. It might be closing. Publishing is complicated, increasingly complicated, and sad because so many presses are running out of money. So I didn't think that would happen to Amsterdam University Press. I wanted to move away from a U.S. university press in the age of Trump too. But I apparently presses even in Europe are having similar economic problems.
All right, so moving quickly, so we have just under 5 minutes, but there is a question that just popped up. So I'll read it, and I hope we can get a brief but deep response. Okay, it goes. You said in your book introduction that extraction has both facilitated and obstructed filmmaking in Nigeria, unquote. Has that always been the case with the Nigerian film industry, or an academic view of the nascent neoliberal capitalist economy that undergirds filmmaking in Nigeria?
That's a great question. I do wish I had done more to show how extraction has specifically obstructed filmmaking and filmmakers. The one example I use is of the production for the NTA, the adaptation for the NTA in the mid-1980s of Things Fall Apart, drawing on Matt's work, specifically drawing on Matt's readings of that film, but also trying to point out that Things Fall Apart is set before the coal industry as such really came to Enugu. And so that production had to sidestep the evidence of extraction that remains to this day. I mean, it was obvious in the mid-1980s, I'm sure, that these sites had been sites of extraction, that these hills were sources of coal. It's still the case to the hills have been opened up. There are still open pits. There are still and there's of course talk now of formally reopening, formally reviving the coal industry in Nigeria. There's a lot of talk of that at the federal level, at the local level, at the popular level. A lot of people are saying that coal mining is or needs to is returning or needs to return to Nigeria for economic reasons, for other reasons. And so there are some filmmakers who historically in Nigeria have not wanted to directly depict extraction sites, and so who have had to relocate. They haven't been able to shoot on location in certain parts of the Niger Delta because those parts of the Delta region have been polluted. Right? There are environmental reasons, there are bodily reasons for moving away from certain extraction sites. So that history of obstruction, I think, is really important. I think it's underanalyzed in my book. I think that is an avenue that someone else, I think, might want to consider. Right? How has extraction gotten in the way of filmmaking in Nigeria?
Sorry, if I may ask a very quick more trivial question. Is the S in your last name silent?
Oh yeah, it's Tsika. Yeah, it's
Okay.
that's yeah, Tsika. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. We're just right on time to close here. Once again, I want to congratulate ReadersTsika. This is an excellent piece of work. I'm sure those of us who have the opportunity to teach Nollywood films will have something to work with, another piece that we can sort of integrate into our work with students. For researchers, people who are doing current research, like Professor Ibikunle, I'm sure you have a lot to work with here. So congratulations again. Thank you to the discussants for your insightful observations and feedback and questions for ReadersTsika. Thank you, Tsika, and we enjoyed the piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Bye for now.